For months, the courtroom echoed with silence. No official statements, no interviews, no justice, only waiting. A quiet town in Idaho was shattered by a crime so brutal, so calculated, it stopped the nation in its tracks. 4 bright college students, gone. In one night, in one house, in one horrific act of violence. Their names are burned into our memory. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Majin, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin, each with dreams, with families, with futures ripped away in an instant. But as the community grieved, something strange happened. Instead of answers, there was a wall of silence. Instead of public clarity, a legal blackout. That silence wasn't just felt in the courtroom, it blanketed the entire investigation. Because soon after the arrest of 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger, a criminal justice graduate student, the judge issued a rare and powerful gag order, a complete ban on public comment from prosecutors, defense attorneys, law enforcement, and even the victims' families. Everything went dark. We were left to speculate, to search for clues between court dates and closed doors, to wonder, was the suspect acting alone? Was there a motive? Was the system trying to shield us from something darker than we imagined? And then silence. For over a year, until now. In a stunning shift, just weeks before Bryan Kohberger faces the most serious penalty the state can offer, death, the judge lifted the gag order. Just like that, the chains have been broken. The silence is over. And that changes everything. Now, for the first time in over a year, those closest to the case can speak. Families can finally raise their voices. Attorneys can shape the narrative. And the public, you can start to see the full picture emerge. But here's the chilling part. What exactly have they been keeping from us all this time? What details have been hidden? And why now? Was this silence just a legal safeguard? Or was it the calm before a legal and emotional storm? This is not just the story of a trial. It's the story of a community demanding justice, of a nation watching closely, of a suspect whose quiet demeanor masks an unfolding mystery. Tonight, we open that door. We follow the trail of facts, emotions, and unanswered questions. Because now that the silence is broken, the truth has nowhere left to hide. It was one of the most aggressive silence mandates we've seen in a true crime case of this magnitude. And just like that, the flow of information stopped. News anchors scrambled. Journalists were stonewalled. The families of the victims, desperate to speak out, were told to stay silent. Kaylee Goncalves' father, Steve Goncalves, a vocal advocate in the early days of the investigation, suddenly fell quiet. His public cries for transparency were replaced by solemn appearances, often flanked by attorneys. Why the silence? According to the court, the gag order was intended to protect Kohberger's right to a fair trial. The media frenzy was fierce, and the risk of tainting a potential jury pool was real. This wasn't just about legal strategy, it was about control over the narrative, over perception, over justice. But the silence had consequences. Families felt shut out. The public felt abandoned. Speculation filled the vacuum. Some believed prosecutors were hiding explosive evidence. Others thought the defense might be negotiating a secret deal. Conspiracies bloomed, unchecked. And through it all, Bryan Kohberger remained silent in the courtroom. He often showed little emotion, no public statements, no plea, just silence. Legal experts debated whether the gag order went too far. Several media organizations, including CNN, the Associated Press, and the New York Times, filed motions to have it lifted. They argued it was unconstitutional, a violation of First Amendment rights. The families, too, pushed back. They wanted to speak, not just to grieve, but to fight, to keep their children's names alive in the public consciousness. But for over a year, the order held. And while the courtroom was locked in silence, behind closed doors, the case continued to build. Evidence was examined, motions were filed, arguments were prepared, every step taken, but shielded from the public eye. It wasn't just a courtroom under control. It was a case unfolding in the shadows. Until now, the silence has ended. The truth is ready to speak. After more than a year of silence, more than a year of sealed lips, withheld answers, and courtroom restraint, the wall has finally cracked. In a monumental decision, the Idaho judge presiding over the case of Bryan Kohberger has lifted the sweeping gag order that silenced nearly every voice tied to the murders of Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Magin, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin. This isn't just a legal shift, this is a turning point. For the first time since Kohberger's arrest, prosecutors can speak. Defense attorneys can frame their case publicly. Police investigators can clarify what they found and what they didn't. And perhaps most powerfully of all, the families can speak without restraint. They can cry, they can rage, they can remember. Montage. Family members exiting court, clutching photos of their children. One wiping away tears. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, had once said that the gag order cut the knees out from under their pursuit of truth. Now, that pursuit is back on track. And it will be loud. But this decision doesn't come without risk. The timing couldn't be more crucial because Kohberger's trial is inching closer, and with prosecutors seeking the death penalty, the stakes have never been higher. So why now? Legal analysts suggest several reasons. Some believe the court now feels confident in the strength of its evidence that even with public scrutiny, the case against Kohberger is rock solid. Others think pressure from national media and constitutional free speech advocates finally broke through. And some say the move was inevitable, that no case of this magnitude could remain buried in secrecy forever. Whatever the reason, the floodgates are open. Already, speculation is rising. Will we finally see surveillance footage that helped track Kohberger's movements? Will DNA evidence, once summarized in vague legal language, now be made public? Will the victims' families reveal disturbing new information that had been sealed away? And then there's Kohberger himself. Since day one, he has maintained an unnerving calm. No outbursts, no interviews, no explanations. But now, with the gag lifted, his legal team may finally begin building a public defense, or planting seeds of doubt. Will he break his silence next? This is more than just a court case. It's a battle between justice and secrecy, between law and emotion, between truth and silence. And that silence, it's over. What comes next will be loud, emotional, and impossible to ignore. Because in this case, when the silence breaks, so do the lies. Bryan Kohberger walks into the courtroom with the stillness of a man who knows he's being watched, eyes scanning the room, face expressionless, posture controlled, calculated, not quite stoic, not quite nervous, something else. As the world looked on in horror following the murders of 4 University of Idaho students, Kohberger became the focus of a question that still haunts the case today. What kind of person could do this? And more chillingly, why? To understand Bryan Kohberger is to dive into a mind shaped by control, detachment, and an unnerving fascination with criminal behavior. Because unlike many violent criminals, Kohberger didn't come out of nowhere. He studied crime, he studied killers, and according to prosecutors, he may have tried to become one. Bryan Kohberger wasn't some drifter or stranger to the justice system. He was a PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, just a short drive from the scene of the murders in Moscow, Idaho. His academic work focused on forensic psychology, deviant behavior, and the inner workings of the criminal mind. He studied patterns, he questioned motivations, he explored the why behind violent crimes. But it didn't stop at lectures or textbooks. In a disturbing twist, just months before the killings, Kohberger posted a survey online asking criminals to share how they selected their victims, how they felt during and after the crime, and what they were thinking during the act itself. This wasn't a class project. This was a man reaching into the mind of killers, not just for research, but perhaps for something deeper. A blueprint? A test? A mirror? Those who knew Kohberger describe a man of contradictions. In high school, he was reportedly bullied, mocked for his weight, his social awkwardness, his inability to connect. But later, he transformed physically, lost weight, built muscle, changed his demeanor. And yet, the social unease remained. Classmates say he was intense, sometimes arrogant, and often difficult to talk to. Some remember him as someone who tried to dominate conversations, especially when it came to crime or law enforcement. He spoke like he had something to prove, like he knew something the rest of the room didn't. At the same time, Kohberger worked as a teaching assistant in criminal justice, but students complained. His feedback was erratic, harsh. Right before the murders, he was reportedly fired from that position due to behavioral issues. And the most chilling detail, at least one of the victims' families claimed he had previously followed them, perhaps stalking them long before that November night. According to investigators, Kohberger meticulously planned his actions. They allege he turned off his phone for hours during the window of the murders, a tactic to avoid tracking, but technology caught up. His vehicle, a white Hyundai Elantra, was spotted on surveillance near the crime scene, and his DNA was reportedly found on a knife sheath left at the scene, lying next to one of the bodies. After the murders, he returned to class, presented a calm demeanor, acted for all appearances normal. One former classmate recalled him contributing to a discussion about the murders as if nothing had happened. Was this arrogance? Detachment? A man hiding in plain sight? Or worse, enjoying it? Criminal psychologists have studied cases like this before. Some believe Kohberger fits the mold of an individual with obsessive-compulsive traits and antisocial tendencies, someone who lacks empathy, but craves dominance and mental superiority. He didn't explode in rage. He executed a plan, according to prosecutors, with precision, to enter a home late at night, bypass multiple roommates, and kill 4 people without alerting others requires something more than impulse. It requires control, and control, for someone like Kohberger, may have been the entire point. But what was the motive? The prosecution has remained tight-lipped. The defense even more so, but theories abound. Was it personal? Did he know the victims? Was it symbolic? An attempt to prove himself superior, intellectually or physically? Or was it experimental? One of the more chilling theories is that Kohberger, steeped in criminal psychology, wanted to test himself. Could he commit the perfect crime? Could he become the subject of the very studies he devoted his life to? Throughout multiple hearings, Kohberger has remained mostly silent. He's spoken only when legally required. No press statements, no apologies, no expressions of emotion. When the judge read the charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder, his eyes didn't flicker. To the families of the victims, the silence was unbearable. But to experts, it was telling. A man like Kohberger doesn't want to speak, unless he's controlling the conversation. Some believe he's waiting for trial to make his move to challenge the evidence, the process, the very system he studied for years. Others believe he'll never talk, that his silence is part of the statement. Now that the gag order has been lifted, more of Kohberger's past and present may come to light. We may hear from former friends, teachers, even mental health professionals. We may see patterns in his writing, his behavior, his travels. And with the death penalty on the table, we may finally hear from him in court, not out of remorse, but as a last-ditch defense. But one thing is certain: the man at the center of this nightmare is not a mystery to those who study behavior. He is a symbol of something we don't want to believe is real. A person who walks among us, observing, calculating, hiding in plain sight. He is the kind of suspect who doesn't just kill. He studies the aftermath. Because for Bryan Kohberger, this may not have been just a crime. It may have been a thesis. Now that the gag order has been lifted, and the silence surrounding the case is shattered, the question hanging over the nation is no longer just what happened. It's what comes next. We're entering the most critical and unpredictable phase of the Bryan Kohberger case, a time where new information could emerge, where legal strategies begin to clash in the open, and where the victims' families finally step forward with the weight of a community behind them. They're about justice, truth, and what it means when the entire nation is watching one man's fate unfold under the gravest accusations imaginable. Let's break down what might come next, and why the next few months could reshape everything. Bryan Kohberger is not just facing murder charges. He is facing capital murder in the state of Idaho. That means the prosecution is actively pursuing the death penalty. In legal terms, this means the trial must follow the rigorous standards of a death-qualified jury, additional evidentiary procedures, and a two-phase trial process, one to determine guilt, and one to determine whether the death penalty should be applied. But before the trial even begins, the legal chess match will intensify. The defense will likely file more pretrial motions, seeking to suppress key pieces of evidence, particularly the DNA found on the knife sheath and any cell tower tracking data used to place Kohberger near the crime scene. Meanwhile, the prosecution may continue submitting motions to expand what's admissible, possibly pushing for more of Kohberger's digital footprint, his academic writings, or even past behavior patterns. And with the gag order lifted, these motions will no longer play out in the shadows. They'll be scrutinized by the public and media in real time. This visibility alone could shift the tone of the trial. The lifting of the gag order could unleash a flood of information that's been kept under wraps for over a year. Investigators may now clarify how they used surveillance footage to track Kohberger's vehicle, how cell phone data showed his movements near the victim's house not just the night of the murders, but allegedly weeks before. What was recovered from his digital device's laptop, phone, encrypted messages, and potentially disturbing online activity. Legal analysts also speculate that new forensic evidence may still be pending lab results, biological traces, or previously unreleased photos from the crime scene. But the biggest wildcard: witnesses. With the gag order lifted, we may begin to hear from neighbors who saw unusual behavior, former classmates who noticed something off in his demeanor, past acquaintances who may now feel safe enough to speak. This wave of testimony, both formal and informal, could paint a more complete picture of who Bryan Kohberger really is, and how long this alleged darkness had been forming. For over a year, the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan were told to keep quiet even as they mourned in front of the world. Their grief was raw, their heartbreak visible, but their voices, legally silenced. Now, they are free to speak, to share memories, to demand accountability, to rally public attention. Expect televised interviews, press conferences, written statements, and courtroom appearances that will move the nation. Some may describe haunting dreams, sleepless nights, or the permanent void that no sentence, not even death, could fill. Others may express anger at Kohberger, at the system, at the months of silence that made them feel powerless. These family testimonies, both inside and outside the courtroom, could sway public perception and shape how future jurors interpret the man's standing trial. This is the question that has kept legal experts divided. Most defense attorneys strongly advise clients not to testify in their own murder trial, especially in death penalty cases. The risks are too high. One slip, one crack in the fog, and a jury could be irrevocably swayed. But Bryan Kohberger isn't like most defendants. He studied law. He studied behavior. He may view this trial as a stage, a moment to display control, intelligence, or even an attempt to twist the narrative. If he takes the stand, it could be explosive. Jurors would hear, for the first time, the voice of the man accused of slaughtering 4 young students in the dead of night. Would he appear calm, cold, charming? Would he deny, deflect, or distance himself from every charge? Or could he, in a moment of strategy or ego, reveal more than he intends? While unlikely, it's not impossible. If the defense believes the evidence is overwhelming and a guilty verdict inevitable, they may seek a plea agreement, potentially offering a full confession in exchange for life in prison rather than execution. But this would require the family's input. Idaho law often allows victims' families a say in whether a plea deal is accepted. And given the brutality of this crime and the year-long silence they were forced to endure, some families may want the case to go the distance. To show the world what happened, to force Kohberger to face every detail in public under oath. Still, a plea deal could spare the families the trauma of a long trial. It would provide closure fast, but would it feel like justice? That's a question no court can answer. Regardless of how this trial ends, the impact will ripple nationwide. This case is now being studied in law schools, criminal justice courses, and forensic seminars. It's a real-time case study in digital forensics, behavioral profiling, victims' rights, media vs. justice system dynamics. The lifting of the gag order alone may influence future high-profile trials, redefining how courts balance fair trial rights with public interest and freedom of speech. So, what could come next? Everything, events, emotion, explosions of truth. But underneath it all remains a deeper current, the longing for justice. 4 lives were lost, not in an accident, not in a moment of madness, but in a premeditated act of violence, one that shook a college town, then echoed across a nation. As we await the trial, one truth remains: justice may be slow, but silence doesn't last forever. And now that the silence is gone, justice has no excuse not to speak. In the end, this case is not just about a courtroom, not just about DNA, timelines, or surveillance footage, not just about Bryan Kohberger. It's about 4 young lives, frozen in time, 4 futures stolen without warning, 4 families left behind to pick up the pieces. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Majin, Xana Kernodle, Ethan Chapin. Names we've come to know, faces we can't forget. They were daughters, sons, sisters, brothers, friends. They were laughing in kitchens, dancing in dorm rooms, studying for finals, making plans for holidays. Until one night, everything ended. Their loss isn't just personal, it's national. A wound that opened in Moscow, Idaho, but bled across America, through news cycles, through vigils, through our collective conscience. Because we don't just mourn them, we see ourselves in them. And that's why the fight for justice isn't a slogan, it's a promise. For the victims' families, justice isn't just about a verdict. It's about truth, about recognition, about finally being allowed to speak, to grieve, to demand answers without being silenced. For over a year, they were told to wait, told to hold their pain in silence, told to trust a system that moved slowly, cautiously, behind sealed courtrooms and legal language. Now, they're stepping forward. We're seeing their faces on national news again. We're hearing their voices, cracking but steady, speaking for children they can no longer hold. We're watching them walk into courtrooms wearing necklaces with their loved ones' initials, or clutching photos as if holding them close might turn back time. This is justice in its most human form. Just punishment, but presence. Steve and Christy Goncalves have become public figures, not by choice, but by necessity. They've spoken at rallies, they've stared down their daughter's accused killer in court. They've fought against the gag order, pushed for transparency, and refused to let Kaylee's name fade. Other families have chosen quieter paths, but no less powerful. Ethan Chapin's parents started a foundation in his name. Xana's loved ones have worked to preserve her memory through scholarships and memorials. Maddie's circle speaks of her joy, her loyalty, her laugh frozen now in video clips and aching memories. They are united in a cause they never asked for, to carry the weight of justice every day, every hour. The fight for justice now shifts from private grief to public accountability. The trial will test every system in place, the ability of prosecutors to present the full truth, the defense's right to a fair and constitutional process, the court's responsibility to hold the balance between law and human loss, and most of all, the jury's burden to decide the fate of a man accused of a crime so brutal, so senseless, that it shook a generation. Will they choose life in prison, or the death penalty? No decision will bring the victims back. But the families deserve to see accountability, not just symbolically, but in real legal terms. They deserve a justice system that doesn't falter when the cameras turn off. This trial, and its outcome, won't be forgotten. It will become a case study, a cultural reference, a chapter in textbooks, a story retold in podcasts, documentaries, and true crime specials. But for those closest to the victims, it's not content. It's not drama. It's the darkest part of their lives, playing out in public. So the public watching now has a role too, to honor the truth, to avoid speculation, to remember that beyond every headline is a human heart still breaking. Even after the verdict comes, whatever it may be, the road doesn't end. Appeals could take years, court motions, hearings, and the lingering weight of knowing the person accused of killing your child still breathes, still stands, still fights to rewrite the narrative. Justice moves forward, but grief never retreats. These families will live with this trauma for the rest of their lives. They'll miss graduations that never happened. They'll visit graves instead of dorms. They'll search every courtroom expression, every legal ruling, for meaning. And all the while, the fight continues. Justice, in the end, isn't just about courts. It's about remembrance. It's about building something beautiful from what was taken. Already, communities have come together in powerful ways. Scholarships in each victim's name, tree plantings, memorial benches, art installations on campus walls, even changes to campus safety protocols, so no family has to live this nightmare again. Justice is building a future that learns from the past. Justice is keeping their names alive in the places they once laughed, studied, and dreamed. So what comes next? The courtroom will deliver a verdict. The public will react. The case will end legally. But justice, real justice, is never complete. Because justice doesn't bring them back. It doesn't erase the fear they must have felt in those final moments. It doesn't return the text messages, the warm hugs, the shared playlists, the whispered secrets. What justice can do, if we demand it, is speak for them loudly, clearly, forever. Because in the end, this isn't just about catching a killer. It's about remembering the lives that mattered more. Kaylee, Madison, Xan, Ethan. The fight for justice continues, not just in the courtroom, but in our voices, in our choices, in our refusal to forget, and for as long as we remember them, they are not gone. Narrator firm, heartfelt. This case isn't just about one man on trial. It's about 4 lives that mattered and a justice system being watched by the world. If this story moved you, if it made you angry, heartbroken, or just more aware, don't let it stop here. The trial of Bryan Kohberger is far from over, and what happens in that courtroom will send ripples across every state, every campus, and every community that dares to believe in safety, truth, and accountability. Share this video. Start conversations. Use your platform, no matter how big or small, to remember Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan not as victims, but as people whose stories deserve to be heard, again and again. Support verified fundraisers, campus safety initiatives, or mental health resources for grieving families. Let your empathy lead to action. Subscribe for justice. Here, we don't just follow cases, we follow through. We shine a light when others turn away. We remember the names when headlines move on. So if you're with us, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and be part of a community that never forgets the faces behind the tragedy. Because justice doesn't end with a verdict, it begins with people who refuse to look away. Together, we keep the fight for truth alive.